Of the four members of the Beatles, Ringo Starr is arguably the one who is written off the most. He was a talented percussionist who was the heart of the Beatles' rhythm, but was always labeled as nothing more than a simple and happy-go-lucky drummer. Come the time of the Beatles' album Abbey Road, and the group is on the precipice of a breakup. Each of the members are starting to yearn for solo opportunities, and out of this time of strain comes this song Octopuss Garden by Starr. It's a song that focuses on friendship and the group dynamic that was the Beatles, and it serves as an intriguing contrast to the dichotomy of the group at the time. This podcast will procedurally analyze Octopuss Garden and its author by reflecting on Ringo's life, the turmoil the band faced recording Abbey Road, the song itself, and finally concluding with a look at the post-band life. This will all come to show that the Beatles were a well-beloved group that simply grew tired of one another. The music wasn't the problem, as even with the release of their last album, Let It Be, the songs were genius. The issues were that the group dynamic that had formed an untouchable base had been eroded by almost a decade of constant production. As a song, Ringo wrote Octopuss Garden as a reminiscence of the simpler times of the band, those in which they all simply sat and wrote and played and enjoyed being around one another. It is a reminiscence as well as a farewell because of the band's imminent breakup only a year later. In discussion of Octopuss Garden and Ringo's place in the band as a member, it's important to understand just who Ringo was. Ringo Starr, originally named Richard Starkey, was only 3 when his parents separated. Living with his mother, Ringo was a sickly child. He had multiple lengthy hospital stays from various illnesses, and his mother had to make ends meet through housework and a job as a barmaid. Things began to improve somewhat when Ringo was 14, as his mother married a house painter from Romford, a city near London. The Beatles were always seen as a group that symbolized the working class, and through his modest upbringing, Starr had a real connection to the working class that some of the other members lacked. Musically speaking, it was during one of his many hospital stays that Ringo became indoctrinated into the drumming life. Upon exiting the hospital, his stepfather purchased him his first drum kit, and the rest is history. Starr would work as a drummer for other London-based bands through the late 50s and early 60s, before landing his drummer role with the Beatles in 1962. As a member of the band, it's fair to say that Ringo Starr was seen as the bottom of the totem pole. Once in an issue of Tiger Beat, a London-based magazine, a fan wrote that if any one member of the Beatles was expendable, it was probably Ringo. This was a constant drumbeat for Ringo throughout the Beatles' tenure as an ensemble, and someone can only suffer a lack of appreciation for so long before it crosses a line. For the majority of their career, the appreciation of his fellow bandmates was enough to quell any dissatisfaction in Starr, but in 1968 it reached a boiling point. Ringo no longer felt appreciated as the group's drummer, and because of that, he decided to take a hiatus from the band. It was during this hiatus that Ringo came up with the idea for Octopuss Garden while listening to a friend's fishing story. The group, through many telegrams of apology, eventually won Ringo back, and with his return, the Let It Be sessions and Abbey Road recordings could take place. By 1969, the Beatles were treading water as an ensemble. Infighting was a constant. Each member was focused on the solo opportunities of the future, and unbeknownst to them, they had 2 albums left in the tank before the Beatles would disband permanently. Yet, had you talked to any member at the outset of the Abbey Road recording sessions, you wouldn't have been able to tell. Abbey Road had originally been christened as a Get Right album for the group. The hope was that working on this album, similarly to how they would work on albums in the early days of the band, would reignite the spark that had left the group, and at first, it seemed to be working. Regarding work on the album, John Lennon was noted to have said, "Paul too, he's mad on it. As soon as I leave here, I'm going round to Paul's place and we'll sit down and start work. The way we're writing at the moment, it's straightforward and there's nothing weird. The songs are like, get back. And a lot of that we did in one take." There was a real intensity and fervor to how the Beatles were attacking the album, and for a while, the attitude of the group truly began to mend. This mending process was ultimately short-lived, though, due to an accident involving Lennon, Yoko Ono, and Lennon's children. On July 1st of 1969, the family was involved in a serious car accident that they were lucky to walk away from. This resulted in Lennon missing 9 days of working and recording with the group, and once he did return, it was with Yoko Ono, who needed near-constant care due to her injuries. The missing days and presence of Ono, who has been well documented as a source of tension for the group, ultimately killed the healing process. The creative ties that had begun to reform were once again severed, and by the album's completion, the group was once again contemplating disbanding. The album still released on time, and is regularly seen as one of the most influential albums of all time, but ultimately the album failed in its purpose of being the get right album the group wished it to be. Octopus Garden is the 5th track on Abbey Road, and it is a song that really embodies that get right mentality that drove the creation of this album. Musically speaking, the song is very warm and inviting. Lennon's electric guitar establishing the rhythm, Ringo's simple hi-hat accents, and the simplicity of McCartney's piano as a barely heard backing establishes a very fun pulse for the listener. The song then elevates itself just after the 1-minute mark with a Harrison guitar solo that is embellished with backing vocal ahs that have been processed to make it sound as though McCartney is underwater. The song employs many such vocal and technical flourishes that make the song the standout it is. There are bubble sound effects dispersed throughout the piece, and Lennon and McCartney's harmonic backing vocals are reminiscent of many other songs that they shared vocals on in the past. At a time when the group was so disjointed, this song allows itself to stand out from the crowd as a group musical effort with key contributions from all the members. Lyrically speaking, the song is all about friendship. For Ringo Starr, it almost seems like a song that screams for the tension of the band to be eased. He sings of how he wants his friends to come and see this garden, and how once there they can sing and dance around because they know they won't be disturbed. It's as if in Ringo's perfect world, the group could just make music together and enjoy it without worrying about the opinions or pressures of others. There is a real longing present for a return to the early years of their career. In hindsight, it's sad to think of how this song that calls back to simpler times for the Beatles came out when those times were no longer attainable. Despite this, the strength of this song is that it never takes itself too seriously. The music invites the listener into this sort of undersea party, and then the lyrics reinforce the jovial nature of the song. The idea of Ringo and his friends singing and dancing in an octopus's garden is entirely fanciful, but it's this fantasy world that's created through the lyrics and music that really sells it as a unique and replayable piece. For the Beatles, Octopus's Garden was a nice sentiment. At its conception, there was hope that things could be better for the group, that Abbey Road would fix all the band's problems, but in reality, things were too far gone. For all the hope he had inscribed in Octopus's Garden, it was Ringo who seemed to be the earliest to recognize the writing on the wall. In March of 1969, he had taken a starring role in the film The Magic Christian, and by October had begun work on a solo album. Now, as with the other members, Ringo found success in his post-Beatles life by being true to the things he had always been passionate about. As a passionate advocate of the 1960s counterculture, Ringo would go on to create his own band, the All-Star Band, which is still active today producing music reminiscent of British psychedelia. Ringo also found success through collaborative efforts, being one of the only former Beatles to collaborate on music with each former member after the group had disbanded. Overall, the Beatles deteriorated because they had lost sight of what a band was. Touring and movie deals had drained them early on in their careers, and the shift to studio recordings had been seen as a saving grace. Yet, it was here in the studio that the bonds of the ensemble unraveled. In the place of the Fab Four grew a collection of solo artists who yearned for something greater for themselves, and in the end, the only way to capture this greatness was for the Beatles to disband. Octopus's Garden is a nice story of resolved conflict and callbacks to simpler times, but in the end, it is still just a story. If the Beatles had remained together, I truly believe that their music would have steadily declined to a point of mockery. Though tensions were high when the group disbanded, the sheer number of collaborations and reconciliations between former members afterwards shows that this decision was the right one. Ringo may not have gotten his song's story to come true during the tense year of 1969, but I think in the end the story took on a life of its own for Ringo. Each member found great success in their solo efforts, boundless collaboration opportunities were available, and I think each member was able to regain some simple happiness in just producing music. In the end, they found their Octopus's Garden, just not the one they expected.